I'm Mariela Alfonzo, founder and CEO of State of Place. I grew up in Miami, Florida. Not the glitzy, glamorous Miami Vice Miami or Welcome to Miami, Miami. My Miami, the real Miami, it was exhilarating, but for all the wrong reasons. Growing up in my Miami was terrifying. As a carless teenager, I was forced to play a cruel, real-life version of a video game, tight-roping down pencil-thin sidewalks, dodging cars as I crossed strip mall-lined highways, masquerading as city streets, all to get to a chicken teriyaki sub. But the stakes were much higher than that, as I learned way too early at the funeral of my 15-year-old friend who lost her life playing that game. So yeah, I've been a bit obsessed over the past 20 years advocating for better places. And while I have plenty of passion to fill an infinite number of Miamis, as a social scientist at heart, I didn't want to just dogmatically tell people that good design was better for us or even what good design was. Instead, I decided to prove to people that design mattered using, well, evidence. First, I started by quantifying what we even meant by good urban design, so I could then tie that back to its health and community benefits. But turns out that arguing that good urban design has social value fell mostly on deaf ears. I soon realized that my real estate friends, developers, investors, brokers, the ones with power, they were the ones I needed to convince. And they frankly told me, Mariela, you just have to show us the money. The only argument they were going to be swayed by, the only way they would consider design in the equation was to quantify its economic value. So that's exactly what I did. Several years later, not only had I evolved and iterated my algorithm to quantify urban design, now known as State of Place, I showed them the money, big time. In fact, I found that increasing a neighborhood's State of Place by 20 points out of 100 was tied to premiums of over $9 a square foot for office rents, $7 for retail, an 80% bump in retail revenues, a $300 unit increase in residential rents, an $80 square foot increase for residential for sale values. And guess what? In the meantime, walkability hit the mainstream. Today, everyone wants access to livable, equitable, sustainable places. People want to live where they can walk. Firms want to locate where their employees can walk. People want to shop and walk. And many other studies have shown them that money. But this isn't just about hipsters or empty nesters getting to live in cool, trendy neighborhoods. Walkability, quality of life, is no longer a nice to have. Because every 25 seconds, someone dies in a traffic collision. Because every year we spend over $31 trillion treating chronic diseases tied to sedentary lifestyles. Because 1 in 6 deaths is tied to pollution. These costs of poor urban design have been clear and significant for a long time, and yet many were still blind to them. Until 2020, the year that changed our normal. COVID-19 has served as an ugly magnifier of long-existing structural inequities and spatial injustices. Turns out that the lack of those same urban design features that impacted quality of life pre-COVID led to many of the pre-existing conditions, the comorbidities that COVID preyed so mercilessly upon. Indeed, in the US, 3.4 times more Black people and 3.3 more Latinos have died from COVID-19 than have white people. Couple those spatial injustices with the systemic racism that plagues the US and many other nations to this day, we can't afford to go back to normal. We must chart out a new normal that it creates more inclusive, equitable, just places that we can all love. But how do we get there? Well, let's start by asking ourselves, how did we end up here? Why have we been designing cities like this? Why have we and our cities been held hostage by the car? Why the lack of dignity in planning? Why are we not heeding calls for people first places? Wallets would benefit from them. Hearts would be so happier and healthier with them. The earth is suffering without them. So why? Why are cities still falling short globally in light of all this evidence about the exponential power of place? Because the city-making process is broken. The city-making process is based on intuition with no evidence. It's based on beautiful images with no data. It seeks public approval without public participation. It's done inside the building, not outside the building. It seeks expert opinion without considering resident-led solutions. Quite simply, the city-making process is a top-down, ideologically based, expert-driven approach accessible only to a few, and it's failing us. Let's take the case of the city of Winnipeg in Canada. Long time ago, they decided that this intersection, poorly designed to begin with, was too dangerous for pedestrians, so they closed it off to folks and made them go underground to cross. Fast forward 30 years, they get a new mayor. He vows to reopen the intersection to pedestrians, but first they have to commission a study. They put out a request for proposals to find the consultant to do it. Price tag $100,000. Year later, the report comes out, but it just collects dust. 5 years later, around re-election time, someone dusts off the study, but it's too old. They need a new one, and with it, a new request for proposals. They choose the usual suspects and spend another $70K. It's still a car first place. Bottom line, almost all planning and development decisions start with intuition and gut. What projects to create, what neighborhoods to focus on, which proposals to prioritize, approve, fund. The product is a plan with beautiful pictures. The process is slow and expensive. And then there's the opposition, who's either armed with data to show why your project is too costly, too frivolous, not up to code, will create traffic, or simply wants to be convinced. Pretty pictures alone don't win this battle. They don't show whether the project makes sense fiscally or why it's even the right project for the community. So you have a process where the beautiful plan collects dust and somehow this crazy eyesore is totally cool. But this is not okay. The most frustrating part of it, data is on the Citymaker side. There's actual evidence that can prove which plan is better. So speaking of data, you might be thinking, well, what about the smart city movement? Yes, it has definitely introduced data into the city-making equation, but it's only telling cities how they're performing today and not how to become the cities they aspire to be. They're focused on quantifying problems like traffic, not on solutions to those problems. It's like being able to predict if you'll get a terminal disease, but stopping short of telling you what to do if you get it or how to prevent it, period. This is where state of place comes in. We've distilled 20 years of social science-based evidence into an AI-driven urban design data and predictive analytics software that quantifies what people love about places and automatically recommends ways to make them more walkable, livable, sustainable, while maximizing return on investment or ROI. We help cities and developers use data to find the most effective and cost-efficient ways to unlock maximum social, environmental, health, and economic value via urban design changes, and then use that data to make the investment case for those changes by quantifying their ROI. To date, we've collected data on nearly 40,000 blocks, amounting to over 7 million data points in over 400 neighborhoods across almost 150 cities in 16 countries. And more importantly, we've helped nearly 40 cities and developers use that data to get awesome places people love done. Take the city of Tigard, a suburb near Portland. They have a vision to become the most walkable city in the Pacific Northwest of the US. While a traditional consultant created a plan for them, they didn't really know where to start or how to get buy-in for their projects. So how does state of place help a city like Tigard? First, we extract data from digital imagery on over 290 urban design features like sidewalks, benches, and trees, and aggregate that into a score from 0 to 100 using our IP based on over 20 years of research to get the baseline state of place index. Now the city can use the software to see scores for all the blocks, as well as a breakdown of scores along 10 urban design dimensions empirically tied to walkability and livability. This allows cities to objectively identify the various assets and needs of their blocks in great detail to see what was working and what wasn't and why they got the score that they got. The software also generates heat maps to help the city start to prioritize blocks and project areas within the redevelopment district. The software also helps you tap into analytics regarding all of the urban design features we collect so they can get an assessment of the whole project area as well as block by block. Now, because our forecasting models show that some urban design features matter more than others depending on what outcomes you actually want to deliver, the city doesn't just have to focus on the lowest performing areas of urban design. Instead, they could generate custom recommendations based on their specific goals, like walkability. And because some urban design dimensions are harder to adjust than others, they're able to tailor their recommendations based on what they're feasibly able to change, as well as identify the changes they can make that will have the most impact given their current performance, goals, and capacity. So while the software is data-driven, it's not formula-based. This is about figuring out how to be your best you. They then used our SimCity scenario tool to determine how various plans and proposals might increase their state of place the most. And in the case of one proposal with two alternatives, a simple revamp of an existing medical facility versus a mixed-use version, while they normally would have had to use the anecdotal evidence or point to other communities to make the case for the mixed-use version, they used our software to show not only that the mixed-use version would lead to a higher state of place index, But because our forecasting models tie state of place to higher real estate values, they calculated the ROI of each scenario and showed that the mixed use version had a higher ROI, even though the project was more costly. But guys, this is just the beginning. Data-driven city making is going to change the world. We're charting a data-driven path for city making from cradle to cradle by quantifying the exponential power of place. So, what if cities didn't come to us already with projects in mind? What if they were able to tap into data for their entire city from day one and then use that data to begin to identify where to focus? So much of this is politically driven right now. So much of today's process is inherently inequitable. Imagine a world in which neighborhoods that really needed it were identified objectively with data, and they were the ones the city focused on first. And what if all requests for proposals, competitions, and projects submitted to cities for approval or funding were required to increase quality of place and actually make places better and more sustainable? Imagine a world where all projects that came to life were truly designed for people and by people. Imagine a world in which we actually knew the answers to simple questions like which of our city blocks have sidewalks, or where could we use more lighting, or which curb cuts need improvements. And what if everyone looking to move to a new neighborhood, or looking to locate their firms, or visiting a city for the first time could just access the State of Place Index for the entire city immediately? Imagine a world where data could help us find the place that would make us happiest. Imagine a world where we can make people's heart smiles with evidence-based design. Well, that world is here. Now, we've developed visual machine learning models to automatically extract our data from digital imagery. First, we gather millions of street-level images for all blocks in your region, process them with our thousands of machine learning models, collecting hundreds of data points like trees, outdoor dining, benches, land uses for each street. This means that instead of taking 20 to 25 minutes to get data for every block, it takes hours to get data for an entire city. We debuted this in March, collecting data for the entire city of Grand Rapids in Michigan. With this tech, not only can we cover an entire city, we can cover all of the US and eventually map the entire world's state of place. And you can easily dig deep into all the data to assess needs, prioritize changes, imagine possibilities, and optimize value. This means, yes, not only can you identify the neighborhoods that need the most help and what kind of help that is, but you can also inform your budgets from the start. You can plan for better transit connections. You can analyze your entire portfolio and target markets to find the best upside opportunities. And you can compare neighborhoods to those all over the world. And what if we could tie state of place to more than just economics? What if we could show how simply making places better can help, well, save the world while making us safer, healthier, happier? Well, with our data automation, we can now more easily show how state of place is indeed tied to the quadruple bottom line. So first, we started by asking ourselves, what if we could show that urban design was a matter of life and death? What if we could show how increasing state of place could help eliminate road deaths and actually achieve Vision Zero goals? Imagine a world where design could get us to zero. Well, that's here too. We collected state of place data for a sample of blocks in Durham, North Carolina, focused on 60 collision sites and the blocks adjacent to them, the known hotspots, and compared them to a random sample of blocks within our current database. We found that quality of place as measured by state of place was indeed a matter of life and death. In fact, we found that for every 1 point increase on the state of place index, the odds of a collision were reduced by 12.3% on average. We've also quantified the links between health and state of place in China. We collected data for 3 neighborhoods in Shanghai across 3 levels of walkability, analyzed how their state of place impacted the amount of walking residents reported. And we found that people that lived in places with an above average state of place walked on average 22 more minutes per week. And speaking of health, we're now using our automated data collection in the city of Philadelphia to quantify the links between urban design, as measured by state of place, and COVID, including the pre-existing health conditions that COVID preys upon, that were tied to the built environment conditions in vulnerable neighborhoods pre-COVID. This way, the city can identify the people and places that need the most help to prevent future disasters and help them cope with COVID better now. And what if we showed how increasing state of place helped mitigate climate change by decreasing vehicle miles traveled, improving air quality, and lowering greenhouse gas emissions? Well, we're working to put place directly in the middle of the climate change conversation by forecasting how state of place impacts vehicle miles traveled throughout California, focusing on how this impacts vulnerable communities in particular. Because once again, city makers need this data to not only find the best ways to mitigate climate change, but prove that you can't fight the good fight simply by making tech-enhanced cars. And of course, the goal is to use this data-driven city-making approach to help us achieve UN Sustainable Development Goals and save our planet. And ultimately, what if people could get involved in city-making without having to wait for cities to come to them? What if our scenario tool included a fun, easy 3D modeler that could be used by everyone and anyone? And what if our software gave regular people options of what could be? Imagine a world where people are not just complaining about the things they don't like, but are able to submit vetted solutions to cities and heck straight to developers with their state of place index and corresponding ROI. Yeah, we're building that too. State of place is more than just a startup. State of place is the embodiment of 20 plus years of passion, perseverance, and data geekdom. State of place is born out of a sincere desire to make these 20 plus years accessible at scale, not to the few, but to the many. State of place is a rebuke of top-down, ideologically based, dogmatic, architect-driven city-making. State of place isn't simply seeking to become the de facto data-driven decision and communication city-making tool. State of place is seeking to fundamentally disrupt the do as I say because I know I'm right, do as he says because of who he is, do as they did because look how cool what they did is mentality that pervades the city-making process. For me, that's the real opportunity for smart cities. Using data-driven city-making to create happy places is worth infinitely more than the simple zeros and ones behind the smart city movement. State of place will make the data-driven justification, the data-driven city-making, the new normal. Not simply because in data we trust, but because data-driven city-making is the best means to the end of reclaiming our streets for people, to the end of making all our pockets more full, of making our hearts happier, of making our planet healthier, to the end of building a world in which we can all live in truly exhilarating places we can't get enough of, to the end of getting awesome places people love done, so that we can change the beginning of my story to growing up in Miami was simply amazing. Let's use data to create awesome, happy places all people can access and love. Thank you.